this though is all about me. I was asked to put together a presentation that mixes the sort of the corporate and kind of maybe you might describe as the personal work. I'm a graphic designer. I struggle to say the word art and in relation to kind of what I do. But I think in terms of how I think about those kind of projects as kind of either research or places that put a kind of a slightly different type of thinking. So the talk is kind of about these two kind of poles that my work also oscillates around. And the two I'm going to kind of focus on is the Formula One project, and then my magazine, my newspaper called Civilization. So they're kind of like the two poles, I suppose, of kind of what I do and who I am. But more formally, as you just said, I mean, I have a little design agency called Food, which is corporate design, logos, branding, advertising, and then I have a kind of an editorial kind of frame of kind of context, if you like, where I'm the kind of the editorial director and design director of Interview magazine, and then I have these two kind of publications, Civilization and Nuts. But they all, and I think this is kind of the theme in some ways of this whole presentation in terms of kind of me, because it's just the way that these things just inform each other and kind of in like this kind of these virtuous circles that kind of, all these loops really that exist between kind of one piece of work and the next, because they all kind of intertwine and they all kind of like loop together. I'll give you a little kind of précis before we kind of begin the kind of the, just in terms of talking about Formula One and stuff, is that, this Interview magazine. So I've done Interview since I think about 2017, something like that. I do it with a kind of guy called Mel Ottenberg, primarily. It's an old Andy Warhol magazine. And, I don't want to linger on it too much, but kind of, these are the sort of the types of spreads and the types of kind of graphic design, if you like, that we kind of do there. We have a kind of a basic kind of typeface called Caslon Ionic, which is, I mean, all my work, all my typefaces, my single kind of expression in terms of kind of typography is a guy called Christian Schwartz, who everything kind of comes from. And that kind of underlies it sort of sits underneath everything on this kind of project. And then sometimes we kind of add a typeface on top. But yeah, there's a few pictures of Interview. Then I recently redesigned Rolling Stone. Let's just move on. And then I do sort of more formal kind of design work. This is for a kind of startup called Mana. This is for a storage, a kind of a Dropbox kind of competitor called Air, which, it's just, so again, kind of just more kind of traditional kind of graphic design, kind of branding work, which pays the bills and, which I'm completely relaxed about. And then this was an example of a kind of a logo that we did for a kind of crypto company called Finny, which is trying to existing in the sort of art space on some level, but kind of trying to cross those two kind of poles. We'll just let this go because then it resolves itself because it's quite nice to look at. All those last three projects are essentially just kind of corporate design, standard brief. And then I kind of work with all these three kind of come through my agency called Food. But then I also do, I do a lot actually. I'm fairly thirsty in terms of the types of work that I like, and I like to be very busy. This is a space called Earth, which is on Orchard Street, and I do the posters for free. I may just point out, I think maybe we should talk about money a little bit. So kind of like this is definitely, this is a project that I do for free. It's a project that's run by a guy called Dean Kissick, who is a good friend of mine. And there's just a very simple, as you can probably tell from there, that anything goes as long as it's kind of black and white. I just pulled a few of these off the Instagram today, but they're really straightforward. I mean, I like very straightforward design. I like design that isn't really design. So you can see a couple of examples of that. And then some are more kind of maybe what you describe as being a little bit more kind of corny or sort of, ideasy. But yeah, everything kind of held together by black and white. And then you will have noticed there was a heavy traffic kind of poster. And again, this is just like how my worlds kind of interlink and kind of lock together. So I do a literary magazine called Heavy Traffic with a guy called Patrick. Again, I don't get paid any money for this. It's a magazine which is set in Baskerville. For the design nerds, I chose that font because I just kind of thought it was the most literary of all the kind of. And also there was a kind of a book when I was growing up called the D.D. Smith, which is a cookbook. So that was the reference, which I should have probably put in the talk, but didn't. But yeah, so this is, and I think this kind of book on some level, actually maybe there's a little bit of incoherence in terms of kind of the way that we're kind of thinking about this, which maybe relates somewhat to kind of like Lawrence's talk. But yeah, it's just a sort of a kind of an attack of this one font and trying to do as much as you can. The book, it's kind of ostensibly a magazine, although it's kind of formatted very much like a book. And then as I've done about 4 or 5 issues of this, and it's kind of like a lot of stuff, it's gradually becoming more and more incoherent, even though the kind of the sort of the actual text is I'm usually sort of very careful to make sure that that's very legible. But then you have these kind of these ways where we're kind of introducing again like kind of incoherence or kind of mess. Again, like kind of approaching some of the themes that Lawrence was talking about in a sense of kind of just like how language is decohering and how and this Dean, Patrick, me, and the Civilization Project, which I'll come on to talk about, are kind of are interested in that, are interested in kind of the way that language is changing. So a spread could have just a very simple kind of like line on it, or it could just be really confusing. The latest one I did, which I don't think I've got pictures. Do I have pictures of it here? No, I don't think I do. I was actually just then mixing entire texts together. So kind of usually we call these things pull quotes. Usually sort of we've limited them to, the pull quote this being the pull quote, is from the story. But at the moment we're kind of just mixing them up even more, feeding them into ChatGPT, kind of getting it to remix it almost, or kind of to make a different sort of sense from it. So you have these pieces here which kind of just are kind of using the two texts to invent a third text almost. But then sometimes this text just grows. It's really just trying to be as playful with the form whilst trying to keep it legible, and being, as I said, kind of as playful as we kind of can with it, because being kind of really kind of really, I think understanding that some people don't read, some people just flick, and that's fine. I think I'm trying to kind of inject a certain sort of kind of an energy, if you like. I want people to feel like the book. I think I've become somewhat obsessed with objects, which is something we'll kind of come on to talk about a little bit more, and just their kind of resonance, and sort of just kind of creating design that kind of talks and kind of that has a kind of a feeling kind of attached to it. A few more pages. And then in some ways this kind of, it leads to another one of my kind of publications, which is Nuts, which is, I think kind of came out of, working with Interview. And it's the first time I'd really worked in fashion. So kind of I wanted to sort of do my own take on it, even though, Interviews ostensibly my magazine. But it didn't. But the fashion, I don't know. I just kind of felt like I wanted to explore that a little bit more. So I kind of made this one a very big book called Nuts. This is the first. It's the first kind of cover. This is the second cover. The third one, and I think I'll do 3 of these. We'll have text over the top of that, so you can kind of see this kind of like layering effect. This is a girl called Chilita. This is kind of an attempt at spirituality. Again, like kind of thinking about Lawrence's chart there. I saw kind of there was spirituality in the time. I'm very interested in that. I think that objects, and I think that design, I think we can kind of communicate, and I enjoy that. I kind of so this book is very thick. Every single, this is the first spread. Every single picture in it, I print out so it physically exists. I think there's a sort of an energy that you get from kind of going down in generations with kind of pictures. And so, like the whole book kind of is really just trying to is trying to kind of reach you, is trying to kind of connect with you. The text I mean, sometimes we just kind of cross text out, but kind of the text is kind of written. Actually, the first issue was written mostly by me and this girl called Isabel. The second one was a much more kind of group writing exercise where I just kind of cut and pasted lots of kind of people's lots of people's kind of commentary and inner thoughts and diary entries, combined with self-help texts, just instructional and instructional kind of text, I guess, and again kind of like layering in language and kind of like mixing languages together, just to try and kind of reach a sort of degree of incoherence. Sometimes it's just pictures on their own. I try and get a little bit of text on every single page, even if it's just a credit. I really like fashion credits. And I like just sort of using these spaces to kind of to interject slightly different meaning. Underwear from the supermarket, bunny from dad. I mean, my primary interest is kind of twofold. One is like how text modifies pictures, and then somewhat more interestingly, how text modifies other text. I think all my work although maybe not Formula One particularly, but kind of most of my work kind of oscillates around has that at its kind of core. So again, slogans, images, this is just a big diagram, essentially. This is my friend Isa. This is a story about shoes. And again, it's trying to be a little bit challenging, I suppose, on some level of kind of just unpacking kind of fashion and desire. I'm being kind of real and, kind of undercutting something of the kind of fashion measure, which is just positivity, but, or rather kind of just value, aspiration. This is a list of all the kind of Comme des Garçons kind of stores or kind of branded opportunities that Comme des Garçons has. The first book was called The Nothing, the Everything. Oh, it's a little bit jumpy. This is actually my kid's photography. He's really into those little printer machines. This is Isabel, who writes most of it. We get people to send pictures in. The other thing about this, which I suppose is somewhat important, is there's just no photographers. It's all self-shot. Well, there's a couple of photographers, but mostly it's stylists. And I guess that's Adam Zimeri, who's about to blow up to be the biggest photographer, I think. But he took that picture. It's really just sort of, one of the kind of the ideas around this thing was that we removed photography. Again, we're just trying to get kind of people to think about images in a slightly different way and kind of not to have them kind of owned by a kind of photography sort of philosophy, if you like. Then I'm going to just do a little bit of a kind of a life story now, very, very brief one, which is kind of like my life kind of changed really when I moved to the States about 15 years ago to do this project, Business Week, which I think, it was mentioned that I worked for The Guardian beforehand, so a lot of this is kind of informed on some way by kind of the design principles that I learned under Mark Porter. This typeface, Neuhaus Grotesque, was half commissioned for the Guardian project, and then when I did Business Week, I kind of just pulled that out with the trash because it did get trashed, and kind of commissioned that. Again, kind of Christian did that. And I was there. Oh, a little bit blurry. I was there for about 5 years, which was enough time for me to get a green card. And so these are kind of a selection of some of the kind of the I guess my more favourite covers. I think they sort of speak for themselves, really. This was stolen from it's kind of stolen from an old English advert by the Halifax, which is no one's going to understand that reference, or I'll jump on. Yeah, Bitcoin back in, God, when was that? Like a long time ago, 2011. I wish I bought some. Yeah, Obama was in, so kind of that was the yeah, an Obama cover. How to cover. I mean, everything that I've done, really, what you're going to see is a kind of a series of collaborations. I should have probably talked about the other people I've collaborated with. This is a collaboration with a girl called Tracy Marr, who I had a very kind of profitable working relationship with. This is just a kind of a rip-off of a magazine called Private Eye, which again is like this British paper. This, I think, is probably the most famous one, which is just says it all. And then, you know, and I kind of, you know, I was doing that for about 5 or 6 years, and this is what is this? Like 2015, 2014, something like that. And like the magazine market was kind of totally cratering as far as I was concerned. And I was just thought, I'm just not going to have a job if I said, rather than just going to be like this magazine for the rest of my career. So I sort of forced myself out of kind of magazines, and at the time everyone was kind of pivoting to video, and so I thought I got this kind of like random opportunity to work at MTV, which is a kind of a reoccurring theme, the kind of the random opportunities that kind of get offered to me. I think I'm lucky. You know, I do get kind of opportunity, but then I'm also, you know, I don't know. I take random things on. Nobody really wanted to do this project, which is why I got the project, kind of this, you know, when I was redesigning it. I think I spot opportunity where others maybe don't, and I'm an opportunist, you know, fuck it, I'll do it. Just give me a bunch of money and I'll do it. And then, so I went to MTV for a couple of years. I mean, the bigger story of this was just like the kind of collapse of MTV, because I was there kind of when I, you know, whilst I was there, it was already kind of like happening. You know, this is a whole lecture in itself, but I'll kind of just show you probably the kind of the fanciest bit from it, which was, I mean, the reason I went there, the job that I had was to do, you know, the little bumps in between the shows, which again, kind of back in the day were kind of quite, well, back in the day, when I was growing up, were a kind of a thing, and kind of in the way that they got the MTV logo to move. So I got kind of handed that brief, but with a layer that they had to be topical. So I had a team of kind of pretty young motion designers who actually all just fresh out of, I mean, mostly Yale actually, but like out of schools, and we didn't really know. I didn't know what I was doing. They didn't really know what they were doing, and we kind of just made these kind of idents. We probably did about 5 or 6 a day. I mean, most of them were terrible, but kind of like a few of them kind of, but they make a nice little kind of bumper reel here, as you'll see. This guy called Mike, who got into one of those costumes. So we did, so there's a lot of kind of just, we made everything pretty much ourselves. This was, I forget this guy's name, but he was great. You know, yeah, I mean, we just did these all day. So there was very, very little kind of continuity between the visual kind of continuity. It was really just sort of, I mean, this is Drock here. So I suppose we use quite a lot of Drock actually. But yeah, but mostly it was really just kind of like whatever anything came. We were just really kind of like allowed to fuck about on the, you know, and given an opportunity just to kind of put this out in this very, very kind of quick turnaround.
Side chicks is a stable and safe number to have at one given time. None, you creep.
Hey, MTV, you can cut the crap with the tweets on your commercials.
This is us putting the internet back on the TV, which was kind of quite popular. I mean, it seems to be so straightforward now, but kind of actually the two mediums were very, well, they still are pretty disconnected, let's be honest. You know, let's move on. Towards the end, I spent 2 years at MTV, and towards the end of that, I was kind of asked at the last minute to do a presentation to Wyden Kennedy in Mexico, this lovely hotel in Mexico, which I did, and sort of I really was just doing it because they said that I could take my wife, and we just want to go on the beach for a weekend. And so I came in and kind of talked about MTV, talked about kind of like my process, and kind of basically got offered a job as a consequence of that hence luck, opportunism, just kind of taking what was kind of in front of me at the time. This was kind of, and this is actually weirdly, this is Ian, who's my partner at Food. This is kind of the first time we really met as well. But then it was at this kind of conference that it was a few months afterwards that I kind of eventually kind of found myself at Wyden Kennedy. But I went there just because I just never worked in an agency. I'd never worked in advertising. Advertising was around everything I did, but I just had no real clue about it. And even it was kind of a disaster on some levels, but I learned more. It was just it was like doing an MBA, really. It was I was kind of introduced to kind of marketing directors. I began to understand how ideas move through big corporations, and also kind of how ideas work globally as well. I was on the global team, so I got flown around and did a lot of kind of a lot of traveling, but they didn't know what to do with me, and I didn't really know what to do with them, and the whole thing was just like going nowhere fast. And then Ian, they had kind of this guy called Sean Bratches, who's kind of like the secret hero of Formula One. He never really gets much of a kind of a call out. Walked into the Wyden office in London and said, we need they just sold Formula. They just bought, so the company Liberty had just bought Formula One, and they just wanted a new logo, a new identity, new face of kind of the brand, because they had all these kind of big ideas. And if it wasn't for this project, I think I don't know how long I would have lasted at Wyden, really, because I would have left. I would have just got kind of kicked out. It was about sort of 4 or 5 months in, and I kind of got called over to London to do this kind of Formula One project. I'd never branded anything, really. Well, I mean, that's true. Everything that I've done has had some kind of branding kind of attached to it. But like media branding and kind of corporate branding, if you like, are kind of two slightly different things. They're two sort of sides of the same coin, two different sides of a kind of maybe a similar sort of coin. And it is a kind of, again, this is sort of just a sort of a theme of just, it's like, I don't know how I got to be sitting in a room to redesign Formula One logo as literally my first project. But my first branding project. I designed logos before, but they were always an extrapolation of a typeface. I was kind of trained in the kind of the modernist kind of principle, where the kind of the language of the media, if you like, the language that you're kind of talking in is also kind of the language of the logo. So this is a really kind of a very different type of kind of thought process to me, and we had no time. I mean, I was like called in June, and they needed it by September. They like literally need everything by September, and this is kind of this kind of global kind of brand. So I don't know. Not that necessarily worried me, because I do work quickly, and I've always worked quickly. So, and I've found working quickly is beneficial as well, because no one really has time to kind of to think. And so, if you just put in a good idea and kind of substantiate it with some thinking, you can kind of, you can sometimes, in my experience, often kind of bend people to your will, and so kind of this was so in this instance, they'd already done some strategy, and this is probably one of the first times I was able to be involved in strategy. Some of these kind of vibes were kind of taken forward. One of the things which maybe isn't illustrated that well with this is they were really desperate for it to be human. Like the kind of the strategic observation was that they really wanted it to kind of feel kind of the human. The driver was going to become important, as you kind of seen as the way they do the storytelling on the kind of the shows. That was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to make it into a video game, and I kind of wanted to do that quite early on, and I didn't, and I couldn't really kind of shake it. So it was kind of I was kind of not exactly kind of like fighting the kind of brief, but it was in the kind of the back of my mind. But anyway, we flew to London, assembled a team, and then so this is the kind of the presentations, which I'll go through kind of fairly quickly. So this is round one. This is the actual kind of probably PowerPoint slide, which was kind of 3 approaches, which were first one we called mass media. I'll go through these pretty quickly. So that was the logo, with this idea of kind of contraction and expansion. here are a few kind of slides to just again to kind of just build out the world. I mean, I thought, you know, my sort of one of my main kind of theses with this is, and actually with my work moreover, is that, you know, you're really just like trying to give a brand, you're trying to give a magazine, trying to give yourself to a certain extent kind of a language and a way of talking. And so I thought, you know, for me, it was really important to kind of just to show, you know, in some ways kind of like the flex of how this thing moves, because it has to have so many kind of touch points. But also just to kind of just to really to give voice to it, you know. I think that is the sort of, I think if I'm good at anything, I think I'm reasonably good at that in terms of kind of just understanding kind of how we feel about something and kind of, as I said, kind of giving voice to it. So this was sort of, you know, number one. The second one was something called pop culture. One of the designers working on this was a guy called David Rudnick. You may know him. So this is definitely kind of Rudnick at like 100%. But essentially, it was kind of the same idea, really. It was just this sort of contraction expansion thing, but with a kind of a very different sort of kind of vibe. And again, just trying to find a language. Well, what is the language of this new Formula One? What is the, you know, how do we kind of communicate that it's different? How do we kind of communicate these kind of, some of these kind of values that you kind of saw before? Yeah, so there's just lots of kind of different kind of manifestations and kind of lots of, and, you know, and again, it's a demonstration of just like how many kind of touch points there are on this thing, and kind of in kind of building this kind of world. The third one was the most insane. It was like, you know, the observation was that there's not really a trophy. Well, there is a kind of a trophy, but it's a crap trophy that the actual champion gets at the end of the year. And so we kind of just like you know, proposed a new trophy, from which the kind of the logo kind of was kind of pulled from. So here are a couple of kind of typefaces, you know, and then, so again, this idea of, well, I don't know what this fucking idea was, to be honest. I mean, like at this point, I mean, the presentation didn't go great, I'll be honest with you, as you can probably tell, although this was a kind of cool thing, and then you had this kind of cute little kind of character, which you could then kind of get kids involved in, and kind of just something that had a kind of relationship to this main trophy. And we kind of did this presentation, and they just like sat there and were just totally fucking baffled. And so we had to kind of go back, and they actually, they gave good feedback, which was like basically just, let's just think about the logo, because, you know, you know, in building this whole thing out, I kind of like raced ahead and kind of built the world, and it was a good lesson. It was a good lesson just to kind of focus on the logo. So this was you know, the second round, we saw a whole kind of like bunch, which was just like simply sort of logos. This is kind of probably our personal favorite, which was just basically a line. They didn't like that. They're like, we can't copyright a line, which is probably fair. Yada yada, yada yada, yada yada. And then this one, and at this point, we had Timothy Luke working for us, who David actually found and kind of brought on, and so he actually kind of proposed the original kind of proposition he had was these things kind of like locking together, and I was just like saw it and just thought, well, there's an F there, they'll probably like the F, and so kind of, you know, and lo and behold, I think just because it was the most simple in some ways and we just needed this fucking thing really quickly. So Timothy kind of, and we kind of built this thing out. And so this was the third presentation in September, which, where again, kind of like starting to kind of to put apply some of those kind of thinking from the initial kind of presentation back into this again. So just trying to work out how it works. We started to kind of to work, again, I think mostly these are Timothy's kind of, you know, kind of sketches of kind of these these typefaces, which we eventually ended up working with a guy called Mark Roulon or something on. But again, these are the sort of the beginning stages, and then this is there are a few things that I really liked about this. There's a lot actually I like about this, but I particularly like the way that we incorporated secondary logos, and I really like these, which were these kind of like race lockups. And so this is the sort of first version of these kind of race lockups, which was this like madness of logo, name, date. It was kind of a pretty crazy challenge, really. So I think this was Luke's kind of initial attempts. Just like thinking about kind of icons that could kind of exist, and then obviously how like every slide's got to have some merch now, haven't they? And so kind of putting those on. Just sort of how it might work on kind of TV, and then obviously the inevitable wheat paste. And then, so by November, it was kind of all done. So this was kind of the kind of brand guidelines. Way too long document. It's like about 400-page document in the end. But this was kind of, actually, I was just, it was probably a few months after November, but this was essentially kind of like we proposed. By this point, the typeface had kind of grown up. Like Mark had kind of done, this is all his kind of work here. But you can kind of see some kind of connectivity, I think, between this and where we started with the kind of strategy. But then, as I said, through this kind of lens of Wipeout, through video games, which is, I don't know. A lot of the things I do have got a little bit of grit to it. They have a little kind of, there's a little bit of kind of tension, and I think that was the tension in this one, which was just like they wanted the exact opposite of this. But actually, it kind of worked pretty well because that's how people watch it. We watch it on the TV, and it's almost like watching a video game. So there's a lot of typography here. I should have run through this presentation a bit more rigorously. But yeah, you can see the sort of the insanity of the kind of that we went to, and kind of just baseline grid scaling, all this bullshit. But I don't know, maybe they use it. I know, who knows? Like the curvature on the fucking corner. And then these I love, I think these, I'm still really proud of these. And they've evolved, actually the team they've got on it, which is this in-house team, is really good, I think. And they've developed these, and I think these continue to look really good. And I always enjoy seeing sort of, where this kind of ended up. And, you've got to put a kind of like a thing, this is definitely not all down to the logo, but it's definitely jumped. Do you know what I mean? Like that, I think the kind of the branding and the kind of the way that we kind of thought about it and the kind of the packaging of it was pretty, has been kind of reasonably successful. And then you obviously got kind of like crazy shit like this happening, and where, you see a logo in that context, which is definitely not expected. And then kind of, like on the, whatever this thing is called in Las Vegas. Oh yeah, there we go. I don't know. It's sort of funny thinking about that idea, thinking back to kind of where that idea came from. But the end of that process was, or rather the kind of I was pretty burnt out by the end of it. And, it was quite a public battering as well. It was kind of, it was a lot of just like, what the fuck am I doing? Also kind of like the context of the kind of the politics that were happening inside the agency as well. And like, I don't know, it was just a weird thing. And I kind of got back after doing the project and kind of just wanted to put on a kind of comfy pair of pajamas in some level, which was, and for me, that's print, that's magazines, newspapers. And, I kind of got back to New York after spending kind of a lot of time in Europe and wanted to do something that kind of reflected that. I think, I wasn't totally aware of it at the time, but the desire was to kind of to connect, I think, and just do something, as I said, that kind of felt familiar. And, again, at the time, I found this on an interview I gave, it was just a sort of, it's funny reading back. I think I obviously said that, but like actually kind of like I was just bored of pictures, and I think I still am a bit bored of pictures and their ubiquity. And so the one of the kind of principles with Civilization, it's Mia, who was one of the editors of it. Even though this cover doesn't really illustrate that because it has an illustration on the cover of it, and these are the first kind of 4 or so issues, was just a sort of, can you kind of create something that has the density and the kind of the interactiveness and the kind of the vitality of kind of like what you do get when you scroll, this tension between content units, if you like, you're never quite sure what's coming next, that gambling thing that Silicon Valley kind of plugged into social media apps, but just also kind of the tension between, units. And so kind of having different stories next to each other, kind of going back on some level to to old school like newspapers, which are really kind of chaotic and really kind of like jammed together, and actually really exciting to read if you ever find an old paper. The content was my first real attempt at editing as well. So kind of a lot of this stuff was developed. We just recorded people talking, and kind of the translation software was available for free at the time. And so there's just a lot of kind of just direct, you can see here Eleanor, I don't know, oh, that's probably Lucas and me. So that's, so we sort of, so there was a sort of, as a kind of designer, I suppose, you need an editor, you need words in which to work. And so I was just started to develop my own theory of that, and my own way of kind of generating words. But yeah, you need, as I said, sort of just this very kind of piled on. There were actually kind of, when I was reviewing, going through this in the last couple of days, I was kind of surprised at actually how many pictures there are, because the new ones have basically none. But but there's not a ton of pictures, I suppose. Diagrams are still a kind of thing. But yeah, just sort of, this is the kind of fifth issue that we did. And I think over time you can kind of see it just getting more and more kind of intense and more kind of just locked together. I think I'm just trying to kind of get rid of space. So everything just became kind of more and more kind of just intense, really, just because I want, this is a big thing. And so I was interested in that scale. I was interested in sort of how you can respond, how you take in information, because, we've had like hundreds of thousands, like probably tens of thousands of years of receiving information kind of like that on big pieces of paper. And we have kind of Silicon Valley just expects us to go to kind of a screen and just like suddenly nothing else is the same. But I was like less in, I think we do take in information really differently on a kind of piece of paper. And so I was kind of exploring that. This actually became a bit of a thing, because Mia, who you saw up there, kind of said, when we were first doing it, is the only people who care about magazines are the people who are in them, which I think is a really good fucking observation, honestly. And so when we kind of came to do this one, I just kind of like thought, well, if we can just put everybody's name that we can kind of think of in the paper, then everyone will buy it. And lo and behold, they did. So this is basically just all our friends, basically. And it became a kind of it was a little bit memed, actually, this, because it was sort of people who got left out of the mix, etc. But yeah, it's, and then kind of mixing again. This is sort of, I think, where I started to get kind of interested in sort of spiritual kind of feelings and just sort of self-help and directional language, and also just nonsense as well. Again, this is sort of just like the kind of the story of and kind of mixing words and just kind of creating feelings, which to me is sort of somewhat redolent of how I kind of experience social media and how I kind of experience media just generally now, which is just this kind of attack. And yeah, I mean, and sort of, we got Comme des Garçons, sort of put some stuff, found this, and just kind of interesting, because it kind of goes, it was essentially sort of, a lot of what we were doing was kind of was grabbing things we shouldn't really be grabbing, and then for them to to grab this was a kind of an interesting sort of moment of kind of completion. Kind of a bit obsessed with loops, honestly, and that was a good loop. And then as a platform, it allowed me to, this is a poster we did for a Turkish art magazine, and again, it gave me an opportunity just to kind of to think and to unmediated by my own, mediated by my own brand. This was a poster. This is Echo, Echo made all these balloons. We wrote loads of stuff on them. Again, it's just like nonsense, really. Imagine how scared we'd be if he weren't so scared. A lot. Again, the same sort of. I mean, there's such a lot of repetition in my work. Honestly, it's sort of it's instruction. It's not really being particularly sure of where you are at any given time, but it feeling kind of familiar. That feeling that's I've never actually really sort of said it out loud in that way. And then these kind of loops and these cycles. So then we did our own little zine. Hate the word zine. I did our own little kind of publication where we kind of fed those. Actually, we waited for the balloons to deflate, and then we kind of fed those back into these AI, these kind of quite crude AI. So there's some software. This is, I don't know, this is probably 5-6 years ago. and where it's kind of identifying kind of what it thinks it was seeing. And then our friend Emily Siegel wrote this AI text, which, again, felt quite fresh at the time, but now feels very played out. But again, just like this idea of of repetitions and and I was very influenced when I was a kid around like Jasper Johns and how Jasper Johns would sort of recycle all his work. And then the pandemic came, and we were kind of like wondering what the fuck to do because we were bored with nothing else. And so we invented this, just in the great tradition of letter writing or mail art to begin a kind of mail art project where I bought a very cheap printer and went to Staples, and we posted out all these letters from New York, which were opportunities to connect. So again, taking some of the themes of what the newspaper represented. I think we did about six of these, each one kind of was a bit different. It was literally me in my kind of living room, kind of shoving kind of stationery, and I'd go to Staples every couple of weeks and just buy a whole bunch of different kind of quite cool bits of bits of paper. All the text came from me, Lucas, and some friends. But I put this in, it's an important part of the story, really, but I think it I think I fell in love with objects at this point, and kind of a lot of what I realized about what I wanted to keep on doing was the creation of an object. And, I didn't quite realize it at the time, and I think I can I can kind of be a little bit more articulate about it now in terms of the sort of the age of AI and all this kind of business and and fake and digital media. But it was a sort of around the idea of I did get kind of quite a thrill from just these sending these raw pieces. Again, mostly as a graphic designer, you get you get your content, or you it goes to some kind of fancy printer to print. And I really enjoyed that it wasn't any of that stuff, and that it was very personal, and it was all printed on this actually I went through about 3 of these printers. I kind of destroyed them. We did, I think, about 6 letters in the end, and they got increasingly kind of baroque. I mean, I started doing like zines by the end, like little you can kind of see the kind of crappy stapling here. These are some pictures from my friend Elise. I never actually really haven't read these for ages, but they're sort of, I don't know what the fuck they are really. But it kind of like, it set me off on a kind of this is Lucas kind of made some of these some of these heads out of clay, kind of put those on invoices, put on various different kind of note paper. These are these kind of like horny stories. This girl again, Lise was kind of wrote where we kind of put that on in kind of important message paper. I went to buy around me. There's they sell books, and so I kind of bought a couple of books that were kind of this is near my neighborhood, and again like this idea of objects and this idea of kind of like the feeling, like the importance of an object, the importance of this thing actually kind of being real and being kind of from a place, and the energy that contains. So these books we just kind of like ripped up and printed over, and then we just did some more kind of standard sort of photo books, which kind of captured that feeling of kind of captivity, I suppose. And then that kind of informed in some ways the one we did after that, which was kind of actually my, also kind of me trying to destroy the project. So this was the 6th issue, which you can kind of see the influence of, I think, in terms of, like just in terms of the design. I think this is also kind of just like my state of mind, which is not good at that point. And just like the attack and kind of, sort of hateful sort of language and, just not really in a good space, to be honest. And as I said, I just kind of wanted to destroy the project entirely. and make something that would mean I couldn't really do it again, and I couldn't kind of come back to it, because it is a maddening project. It's like doing a jigsaw puzzle without a picture, without any type of guide. And I thought I was done. I thought I was completely done. But I got, like, Lucas kind of convinced me that we weren't done. And I was talking to Dean. Dean wrote a big piece for this, and he was sort of saying that he just wants to be able to read it again, which is, fair enough. And so, but there are these kind of, I kind of inherited a little bit of the kind of the values of the completely chaotic one that we did before. Again, a sort of an obsession with language and confusion and feeling, and also just kind of cataloging kind of where I was at any given time. At 8:44 a.m., that would have been 8:44 a.m. on the day I sent it. Just trying to kind of code in all these kind of energetic moments which kind of make me feel closer to a project. I finally got Christian to cut times. Do you know what I mean? Because all the cuts of times are just terrible. And so I've now got this kind of this cut of times which I use. And I think it kind of, again, like in terms of just sort of, what I was saying before, in terms of just like removing space and removing any type of sense of kind of, just making it as intense as I can. It was that, and then it was kind of more kind of traditional kind of moments, which kind of, I think I wanted you to feel it, but then I also wanted you to read it as well. So I think in some ways it's definitely been the most successful of the iterations. I think, and I mean, maybe I'm just saying that because I've just done it and it's my last piece of work. But it did feel kind of, it felt good. There we go. Some pages, and then kind of just actually sort of then just removing any kind of, there's a lot of kind of labeling, there's a lot of structural work, but then this is kind of an experiment in just removing all of that. And so it just flows as kind of one long piece of text, and all these bits I kind of cut up. So there's, the whole thing is like a group writing exercise. So people kind of, I should probably explain that, but people just like send me loads of words and I kind of like put it down. And there's no sense of kind of authorship around it particularly. But again, just like this feeling of overwhelm and intensity, and just what it feels like to feel, I think. This is the last page as it kind of zooms in, and again, like, I try to be kind of optimistic, and I have this sort of like, I want like the self-help stuff. This is again, there's a lot of, I chose not to hate you. I could have stayed angry, but I stepped past it. Hate is a weight and I needed to walk lighter. I like this kind of mix of, and the content itself is a lot of kind of people moaning about things and kind of screaming into pillows. And then I like the sort of solutions that can be provided when you kind of, you kind of mix those two. And then as an example of the kind of the loop, we did the thing that's different about this iteration of what we did is that we actually did a live event as well, where we got all the kind of the content from the issue 7, put it all into a document, and got people to read it out. And so this is a little video of, so you can see they're kind of reading from a big book. That's the kind of the text from the issue. I don't know if you've ever been to a reading, but they're kind of terrible, honestly. I think like people just like reading out their kind of they're honestly not very good sort of experimental prose. But if you ever read it yourself, it's fucking great. So I kind of just thought, well, if we can get as many people as possible to read, then everyone will enjoy it a lot more. So we had 3 days of that's it. We had 3 days of people kind of reading and reading kind of from the text, and it was really great. I mean, it was. I thought there was going to be some smoke. Was someone there? Some smoke. But yeah, there was. Sorry, enjoy. But we flooded the room with orange light and smoke. And again, like I think sort of is if there was a sort of a final note to this, it's just like the value of this to me as a kind of piece of experimentation, as a piece of kind of way of me kind of. I mean, you can sort of call it research if you like, which I suppose is the kind of the sort of the practical name for it. But it's about kind of, for me, it's just, civilization, kind of a lot of these self-initiated projects are kind of ways for me to explore what I do and to understand the links between them and kind of the corporate work that I do. And so it all kind of turns into something of a kind of virtuous circle where, each idea is feeding itself and, you kind of continue kind of exploring. So that's the end.
From your presentation. Okay, so I think we can squeeze in a few questions, maybe, but I'm actually going to allow myself again to go first.
Mm-hmm.
So, first a plug. So Cukrarna does a magazine called Cukr.
Yeah.
And we actually published one of your projects there with Emily's interview. She was interviewed in the magazine, and one of the latest issues of Nemesis Report.
Oh, yeah.
And she sent us a few pages and we included it. So Nemesis were here in Cukrarna like 2 years ago. They were guests also at INDIGO. So just wondering, what's your relationship with them and they're still working on, and if yes, then what?
My relationship with Emily is that Lucas, who I do Civilization with, has worked on a lot of projects that she did. So it kind of almost comes in a little bit more from Lucas than from me. I've done a couple of things with them. Actually, one of those earlier projects was kind of was with them, one of the kind of branding projects. I haven't spoken to her in a while. We get on. She's nice. She's very clever. Her and Marty have got a very kind of interesting kind of setup. There's nothing much more to sort of, we like each other. We get on. We haven't worked together for a while. We actually worked together, and it didn't really go that great, honestly. And I think that's probably what happened. She's had a baby.
For those who don't know, just check. Nemesis is basically a collective that started because as a group of friends.
Yeah, it kind of comes out of who are the people who did Normcore again? So it's Emily kind of emerged from whatever that collective was. Who but then they do lots of crypto stuff and kind of new age. They ostensibly a kind of strategic company, but they're kind of, I don't know. They just operate in this.
They do like a cultural forecasting thing.
It's very European. It's very European. It's not very American, really. Honestly, it's like it does it. They're a bit illegible and yeah.
So if anybody has a question, again, let's repeat it. Please hold your hand up, and we'll bring you the mic.
Good. Let's do it. Let's go on. There's nothing.
There's one there.
Oh, there's one.
Not free yet.
Okay.
So I have a question. Did you get any more money for the F1 logo being used in the F1 movies, or what is it just?
Well, no. I should have talked about money more though. No, I didn't. No, because I work for an agency, and they did all right at that. I mean, but you sign your rights away. You know what I mean, when you kind of do that thing. But I got paid fine, honestly. Me, myself, and I was fine. I didn't feel kind of hard done by, and it was just it was I wish.
Okay,
I wish. Yeah.
Yep.
Does it ever happen in your creative process, in the way that you do it, that sometimes you maybe try something and it happens on accident and you kind of just leave it there?
All the time. Yeah, now that I mean, I know it's a really kind of like boring creative principle, right? Is you're looking for mistakes, but yeah, all the time. I think you're just looking, and there's another kind of part of maybe some of that civilization work or kind of thinking or kind of process, which is there's a really great line that this designer, whose name escapes me, but his agency was called Tomato, said, which is you make so much that the work makes itself, which I love that expression. You just kind of work so much that you almost lose control of it. And I think if you can kind of get into that mindset, and that's kind of what I sort of I do, I suppose, is just generating more and more stuff and kind of duplicating things, and then just trying to look for mistakes. I mean, mistakes are hard in computers, right? Because they're really good at being kind of very specific about about kind of decision making. So you sort of printing things out is really useful because you see things different ways. So you have to my process is just you have to try hard to make mistakes in a funny sort of way. But yeah, just about everything I do, I think, is a mistake on some level, or at least there were pieces of it which were mistakes or misadventures or kind of opportunity, things happened that were not expected, and that's the route you take. I think on a creative process, the most important thing is just to be really alert, what's going on, like very few, this is one of the, I could have done an entire talk today about kind of like the pain of mood boards and the pain of like Google slide presentations. And even though I actually kind of presented a Google Slides presentation, the type that I hate, which is like, here are your 3 options. But I think sort of, this standardized way of thinking, the way that we're kind of just, the creative practitioners now kind of think in these very kind of defined sort of circumstances, if you like, is really problematic. And it's just not, I think trying to blow my own, for myself, is to try and blow that process up is quite an important part of at least making me like the project I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, you were talking about energies a few times, so just one quick question, and maybe to circle it back also to Slavomir, who wanted to be born in New York. How much is the city of New York as an environment influential on your
hugely? I mean, if you're going to get all kind of new agey about it, I think where I live in the bottom corner of Manhattan, and there's 2 enormous rivers that bypass Manhattan, and I'm convinced that's where the kind of the magic of that place. You're just they're incredibly powerful, strong, kind of enormous pieces of water, which I think directly affect where I am and the city. And it's kind of one of the reasons why New York is such a kind of vibrant and interesting kind of place, honestly. But yeah, no, I'm kind of a big kind of believer in those sort of things, and the energy of New York, trying to capture that. I mean, it's definitely there's nothing. I mean, to work in New York, there's nothing quite like it, really. And for me, I mean, it is different to Europe. It's different to Europe because you're allowed to dream. If I'm being honest with you, like it sort of pains me to say it, where there's a sort of, I was once told about the difference between Europe and America is that in Europe nothing is possible until it is, and then in America everything is possible until it isn't. And I think there's a truth there. I think you can, that there are people, that everybody's motivated by work, which you may have a view on, and maybe that's not so great. Everyone's motivated by money and sort of status and success, but like all those things kind of brought together provides kind of quite a powerful mix. And the thing about America, which I think, well, certainly about New York and my experience about it, which kind of doesn't get written about quite as much, is that there's actually a very supportive network that sits underneath it that kind of glues it all together. It's not just people with really sharp elbows trying to tell you can't do things. People really are invested in your success. If you give somebody, if someone's looking for a design or something and they talk to me and I kind of give them something, if I'm looking for something and I kind of reach out to someone and kind of ask for advice, and that project becomes successful, then that person who kind of helped me feels empowered by that and feels kind of like part of that journey. They feel kind of like they put those 2 people together, and just simple things like that. I don't know if I've articulated that very well. Is very meaningful. People genuinely want you to get on. They want you to sort of not all the time, and there's still definitely kind of, it's very highly competitive, but I have found it a very kind of different environment, and that all adds to this sort of that energy that place has, and the sort of sense of forward momentum that I certainly feel when I'm there, which I haven't really found anywhere else. I mean, it's exhausting. I'm probably going to die early of like fucking heart attack and shit. Do you know what I mean? Because it's it can be pretty intense, and there's definitely kind of like a lot of there's very good reasons why having a kind of calm and more family based life is good for your kind of soul. But I don't know, I just want to build things, I want to make things, and it's easier for me to do that in an environment that kind of supports it, I think. So yeah.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for the lecture. Thank you guys all for coming.